Sarah Mitchell woke up at 6 in the morning in her expensive London hotel room. She had been planning this vacation for 2 whole years. Every month she put money aside from her job at the insurance office back in Ohio. She worked extra hours and skipped going out with friends just to save enough money for this dream trip to London. Sarah was 42 years old, and she believed she deserved the best of everything. She had never traveled outside America before, and this was going to be her big adventure. She spent weeks researching every tourist attraction in London. She made lists of places to visit and things to do. She even bought new clothes specially for this trip, including a bright red designer jacket that cost her $300. The night before, Sarah had checked her schedule at least 10 times. Today was the day she would watch the famous changing of the guard ceremony at Buckingham Palace. She had read online that this was the most popular tourist attraction in London. Thousands of people came to watch the royal guards march in their red uniforms and tall black hats. Sarah was determined to get the perfect photos to show everyone back home. She put on her new red jacket and matching hat. She looked at herself in the hotel mirror and smiled. Sarah thought she looked like someone important. She grabbed her expensive camera that she had bought just for this trip. The camera cost her $800, but she felt it was worth it for the amazing pictures she would take. Sarah left the hotel and took a taxi to Buckingham Palace. During the ride, she kept checking her watch. She wanted to arrive early to get the best spot for watching the ceremony. The taxi driver was friendly and tried to make conversation about the weather and London attractions. But Sarah was too focused on her plans to be polite. She just nodded and kept looking at her phone to check the time. When Sarah arrived at Buckingham Palace, she was shocked by how many people were already there. It was only 8:30 in the morning, but there were already hundreds of tourists waiting behind the metal barriers. Families with children were sitting on blankets they had brought from their hotels. Other tourists were chatting quietly and sharing snacks while they waited. Sarah looked at the crowd with growing anger. These people did not understand that she had traveled 4,000 miles to be here. She had spent her entire savings on this vacation. She deserved to be in the front row more than anyone else. Sarah pushed her way through the crowd, ignoring the surprised looks from other tourists. An elderly British couple had been waiting since 7 in the morning. They had brought folding chairs and were sitting peacefully near the front barrier. Sarah walked right up to them and said she needed their spot. The couple looked confused and politely explained that they had been waiting for over an hour. Sarah told them loudly that she was an American tourist who had paid thousands of dollars to be here. She said they probably lived nearby and could come back any time, but this was her only chance. The elderly couple looked embarrassed and uncomfortable. Other tourists nearby started staring at Sarah. A young mother with 2 small children tried to explain to Sarah that there was plenty of room for everyone to see. She suggested Sarah could stand behind them and still get good photos, but Sarah was not interested in compromising. She wanted the front row, and she was going to get it. Sarah started taking photos of herself in front of the palace gates. She held her camera high above her head and took dozens of selfies. Every time someone walked past her, she would sigh loudly and complain that they were ruining her shots. When a group of teenagers asked politely if they could take a quick photo, Sarah snapped at them to wait their turn. The other tourists began whispering about Sarah's behavior. Some people moved away from her to avoid any conflict. Others shook their heads in disapproval. But Sarah did not care what anyone thought. She was here to have the perfect vacation experience, and nothing was going to stop her from getting exactly what she wanted. As the morning went on, more and more people arrived at the palace. Sarah became more territorial about her spot near the front barrier. She spread out her jacket and bag to claim as much space as possible. When anyone came too close, she would give them angry looks until they moved away. Sarah was ready for the ceremony to begin, and she was determined to get the best photos no matter what it took. By 9:30 in the morning, the crowd at Buckingham Palace had grown to over 1,000 people. Sarah stood at the front barrier looking around at all the tourists with growing irritation. She could not understand why so many people were here taking up space that she felt belonged to her. After all, she had spent her entire life savings to come to London, while these people probably lived just a few miles away. Sarah turned around to look at the crowd behind her. She saw families from different countries speaking various languages. There were young backpackers with worn-out clothes and expensive cameras. She noticed elderly couples holding hands and smiling as they waited patiently for the ceremony to begin. But instead of feeling happy to be part of this international gathering, Sarah felt annoyed that she had to share this experience with so many other people. A family from Germany approached the area near Sarah. The parents were carrying a small baby and had 2 young children with them. The father politely asked Sarah in broken English if their kids could stand in front of her for just a few minutes during the ceremony. He explained that the children were very short and could not see over the adults. The mother smiled kindly and said they would only need the space during the actual guard change, which lasted about 30 minutes. Sarah looked at the German family with complete disbelief. She could not believe that these strangers were asking her to give up the prime viewing spot that she had claimed. Sarah told them loudly that she had traveled 4,000 miles from Ohio to be here. She said she had spent more money on this vacation than they probably made in an entire month. She pointed to her expensive camera and designer clothes as proof of how much this trip had cost her. The German father looked embarrassed and tried to apologize. He said they did not want to cause any trouble and would find another spot, but Sarah was not finished with her lecture. She told them that tourists like her, who spent serious money, deserved better treatment than people who probably got cheap flights because they lived in Europe. The mother picked up their baby and the family quietly moved away looking hurt and confused. Other tourists nearby had heard everything Sarah said. A young woman from Australia shook her head in disgust. An elderly man from Canada muttered something about rude Americans under his breath. Sarah heard these comments, but she did not care what anyone thought about her behavior. In her mind, she was simply standing up for her rights as a paying customer. Sarah decided to make her territory even clearer. She took off her expensive red jacket and spread it out on the ground behind her. Then she placed her large purse and camera bag in a wide circle around where she was standing. This created a personal space bubble that was 3 times larger than what any normal person would need. When other tourists tried to step into this area, Sarah would clear her throat loudly and give them hostile stares until they moved away. A group of British teenagers noticed what Sarah was doing. One of them politely suggested that she was taking up too much room and other people needed space too. Sarah turned around and told them that she was a tax-paying American citizen who had every right to claim her fair share of public space. She said that young people like them should show more respect to their elders, especially when those elders were important foreign visitors. The teenagers looked at each other in amazement. They had never encountered such entitled behavior from a tourist before. One of them started to argue back, but his friends pulled him away. They did not want to create a scene that might ruin the ceremony for everyone else. But they took out their phones and started recording Sarah's behavior, just in case something interesting happened. Sarah noticed people taking photos and videos of her, but she assumed they were impressed by her confidence and style. She started posing for the cameras and even gave a few waves like she was some kind of celebrity. She had no idea that these recordings would soon become evidence of her shocking behavior that would be shared around the world. At exactly 11 o'clock in the morning, the sound of marching boots echoed across the palace courtyard. The noise was like thunder rolling across the stone ground. Every person in the crowd turned their head toward the sound. Even the loudest conversations stopped immediately. The famous ceremony that everyone had been waiting for was finally about to begin. Sarah felt her heart beat faster with excitement. This was the moment she had been dreaming about for 2 years. She raised her expensive camera and checked the settings one more time. She wanted every photo to be perfect, so she could show everyone back home in Ohio what an amazing vacation she was having. Sarah pushed herself even closer to the metal barrier until it was pressing against her stomach. From the distance came the sight that made tourists from around the world travel to London. The royal guards appeared in perfect formation marching toward Buckingham Palace. There were 24 guards walking in straight lines. Each guard wore the famous bright red uniform, with gold buttons that sparkled in the morning sunlight. On their heads were the tall black bearskin hats that made them look 7 feet tall. The guards marched with perfect timing. Every step happened at exactly the same moment. Their black boots hit the ground together, making a sound like one giant footstep. Their arms swung back and forth in perfect rhythm. Not one guard looked left or right. They stared straight ahead with serious expressions on their faces. This was not just a show for tourists. These were real soldiers who had served their country with honor and pride. Sarah was amazed by how professional and disciplined the guards looked. But instead of feeling respect for their service, she saw them as perfect props for her vacation photos. She started taking pictures immediately, even though the guards were still far away. Her camera flash went off repeatedly, making bright white lights that could be seen even in the daylight. Other tourists around Sarah tried to shush her. An elderly British woman gently touched Sarah's arm and whispered that the flash was not necessary and might be disrespectful during the ceremony. A man from France pointed out that the guards were still too far away for good photos and suggested she wait until they came closer. But Sarah ignored all of these helpful suggestions. She was getting her money worth, and no one was going to tell her how to take her own photos. The royal guards continued their march, getting closer to the palace gates with every step. Sarah could now see their faces clearly. These were not young men playing dress-up for tourists. They were experienced soldiers with serious expressions and sharp eyes. Some had served in real military operations around the world. Others had spent years training to earn the honor of guarding the royal family. Every single guard took his duties very seriously. As the guards approached the area where Sarah was standing, she became more and more excited. She started jumping up and down, trying to get better camera angles. She held her camera high above her head and took dozens of photos from every possible position. The clicking sound of her camera shutter was so loud that people 20 feet away could hear it clearly. The crowd around Sarah was getting annoyed by her behavior. Parents were trying to explain the ceremony to their children, but Sarah's loud picture-taking was drowning out their voices. Other tourists who had waited patiently for hours were missing parts of the ceremony because Sarah kept moving around and blocking their view. A palace security guard noticed the disturbance Sarah was creating. He walked over to her position and politely asked her to lower her camera and show more respect for the ceremony. The security guard explained that the changing of the guard was a sacred military tradition that deserved quiet observation. Sarah looked at the security guard like he had just asked her to give up her firstborn child. She was not about to let anyone ruin her perfect photo opportunity. Sarah looked at the palace security guard with complete shock and anger. She could not believe that someone was trying to tell her how to behave during her own vacation. After all, she had spent thousands of dollars to be here, and she felt that gave her the right to take as many photos as she wanted. Sarah told the security guard in a loud voice that she was an American tourist who had traveled halfway around the world for this experience. The security guard remained calm and professional despite Sarah's rude tone. He explained that all visitors to Buckingham Palace needed to follow the same rules regardless of where they came from or how much money they had spent. He pointed to signs posted around the area that asked tourists to be respectful during ceremonies and to stay behind the designated barriers at all times. Sarah read the signs, but she did not think they applied to her situation. She told the security guard that those rules were probably meant for regular tourists, not for someone like her who had made such a big financial investment in this trip. Sarah pulled out her hotel receipt and airline ticket from her purse. She waved them in front of the security guard's face to prove how much money she had spent. The security guard looked at Sarah's documents, but his expression did not change. He told her politely but firmly that the rules were the same for everyone. He explained that the ceremony was not just entertainment for tourists, but was an important military tradition that had been going on for hundreds of years. The guard said that showing respect during the ceremony was not just a rule but was the right thing to do. Other tourists nearby were listening to this conversation with growing interest. Some people started taking out their phones to record what was happening. They had never seen a tourist argue with palace security before. A few children asked their parents why the lady in the red jacket was being so loud and rude. The parents tried to explain quietly that some people do not know how to behave properly in public. Sarah noticed that people were staring at her and recording with their phones, but instead of feeling embarrassed, she felt vindicated. In her mind, these people were finally recognizing that she was someone important who deserved special treatment. Sarah smiled at the cameras and even struck a few poses, thinking that people were impressed by her confidence. The royal guards were now getting very close to the area where Sarah was standing. She could see the details on their uniforms and the serious expressions on their faces. Sarah realized that her photos were not turning out the way she had imagined. The guards were moving too quickly for her camera to focus properly. Other tourists kept walking in front of her shots at the worst possible moments. Sarah's frustration began to build rapidly. She had planned this moment perfectly in her mind, but reality was not cooperating with her expectations. She started pushing closer to the ceremonial route, trying to get a better angle for her photos. Each step brought her closer to the metal barriers that marked the boundary between the tourist area and the official ceremony space. The same security guard who had spoken to her before noticed Sarah moving toward the barriers. He approached her again and reminded her that all visitors needed to stay in the designated viewing areas. He explained that the barriers were there for safety reasons and to make sure the ceremony could proceed without interruption. Sarah told the security guard that she was not satisfied with the view from the tourist area. She demanded to speak to someone in charge who could give her special permission to get closer to the action. Sarah said that, as an American citizen who had spent serious money, she deserved better access than the average tourist. She threatened to write negative reviews online if she did not get the customer service she expected. The security guard explained that there was no such thing as special permission for individual tourists. He said that even very important people like government officials and celebrities had to follow the same rules during royal ceremonies. The guard told Sarah that the ceremony would be starting soon and asked her one more time to please step back behind the barriers and enjoy the show from the designated area. Sarah looked at the security guard with pure defiance in her eyes. She had not come all this way and spent all this money to be treated like an ordinary tourist. Sarah was determined to get the perfect photos she wanted, and she was starting to form a plan that would change everything. She looked at the approaching royal guards and then at the barriers that separated her from them. Sarah was about to make a decision that would shock everyone present and create consequences she never could have imagined. The lead royal guard was now just 3 feet away from Sarah and still marching forward with perfect military precision. His black boots hit the stone ground with the same steady rhythm that had not changed since the ceremony began. His face showed no emotion at all. His eyes remained focused straight ahead, as if Sarah was not even standing there blocking his path. Sarah looked directly at the guard, hoping to see some sign that he would stop or go around her. She waved her hands, trying to get his attention. She even called out hello, thinking that maybe he just had not noticed her standing there. But the guard gave no response at all. His training had taught him that nothing should interfere with his duty to complete the ceremony. These royal guards were not just soldiers playing dress-up for tourists. They were real military personnel who had earned the honor of protecting the royal family through years of dedicated service. Many of them had served in dangerous missions around the world. They had faced real enemies in real combat situations. A tourist taking vacation photos was not going to make them break their discipline. The guard reached Sarah's position, and something amazing happened that the crowd would talk about for years. Instead of stopping or pushing Sarah out of the way, the guard used his professional training to handle the situation. With the same steady pace he had maintained throughout the ceremony, the guard stepped forward and gently but firmly guided Sarah out of his path. Sarah felt herself being moved aside by the guard's trained movements. It was not rough or violent, but it was completely unstoppable. The guard used his body position and forward momentum to guide Sarah backward toward the barrier area. She stumbled slightly as she tried to keep her balance, but the guard's careful movements prevented her from falling down. The entire crowd watched in amazement as the royal guard dealt with Sarah's disruption without breaking his military bearing for even 1 second. His face never changed expression. His pace never slowed down. His eyes never looked at Sarah directly. He simply moved through her position like water flowing around a rock in a stream. Sarah found herself back behind the metal barriers faster than she could understand what had happened. Her expensive camera was still in her hands, but her designer jacket was wrinkled, and her matching hat had fallen off her head. She stood there in complete shock, trying to process what had just occurred. The other royal guards continued their march as if nothing unusual had happened at all. They maintained their perfect formation and timing. Not one guard looked toward Sarah or showed any sign that they had noticed the disruption. Their discipline and professionalism were so complete that they made the incident seem like it had never occurred. Sarah looked around desperately, hoping someone would help her understand what had just happened. She expected palace security to come and apologize for the guards' behavior. She thought surely someone would explain that there had been a misunderstanding and help her get back to her position for more photos. But instead of sympathy, Sarah saw hundreds of tourists staring at her with expressions of shock and amazement. Some people were shaking their heads in disbelief. Others were whispering to each other about what they had just witnessed. A few tourists even started clapping quietly in appreciation of how professionally the guards had handled the situation. Sarah tried to maintain her dignity by straightening her clothes and picking up her hat. She looked around the crowd with an expression that suggested everyone else was overreacting to a simple misunderstanding. Sarah told the people near her that the guard had been very rude to push her around like that. She said she was going to file a complaint with the palace management. But the tourists around Sarah were not buying her attempts to play the victim. They had seen her deliberately walk into the ceremonial area despite clear warnings from security. They had watched her take dozens of photos while blocking the path of soldiers who were just trying to do their jobs. Sarah had created this entire situation through her own selfish and disrespectful behavior. The royal guards completed their march to the palace gates with the same perfect precision they had shown throughout the entire ceremony. They had demonstrated exactly why they were considered among the most disciplined and professional soldiers in the world. They had turned Sarah's moment of entitlement into a lesson about respect and duty that everyone present would remember forever. Sarah stood behind the barriers holding her camera and trying to process what had just happened to her perfect vacation plan. She had no idea that her encounter with the royal guards was just the beginning of consequences that would follow her for the rest of her trip and far beyond. The silence that followed Sarah's encounter with the royal guards lasted only a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Over 1,000 tourists stood completely still trying to process what they had just witnessed. Then suddenly the crowd erupted into a mixture of reactions that Sarah had not expected at all. Some tourists started clapping slowly in appreciation of how the royal guards had handled the situation. Others began talking excitedly to their friends and family about what they had just seen. A few people even started laughing at the absurdity of Sarah's behavior and how perfectly the guards had dealt with her disruption. Sarah looked around in confusion and growing embarrassment. This was not the reaction she had expected at all. She thought people would be sympathetic to her situation and angry at the guards for treating a tourist so roughly. Instead, she was hearing comments that made it clear the crowd was not on her side. A woman from Canada spoke loudly enough for Sarah to hear, saying that some tourists have no respect for local customs and traditions. A man from Australia told his wife that entitled behavior like this was exactly why some countries had bad reputations for their tourists. An elderly British couple shook their heads and commented that young people today simply did not understand proper behavior. Sarah tried to defend herself by explaining loudly that she had paid thousands of dollars for this vacation and deserved better treatment. She said the guards should have been more polite to a paying tourist who was just trying to take some photos. But her complaints only made the crowd more critical of her behavior. Several tourists had been recording the entire incident on their phones and cameras. Sarah could see people playing back videos of her walking into the ceremonial area and taking selfies while blocking the guard's path. She could hear people describing what had happened to friends and family through video calls and social media posts. A group of teenagers from London were particularly excited about what they had captured on their phones. One of them said this was the most amazing thing he had ever seen at Buckingham Palace. Another teenager commented that the video was definitely going to go viral on social media. They started uploading the footage immediately while standing just a few feet away from Sarah. Sarah realized that dozens of people had recorded her embarrassing encounter with the royal guards. She tried to approach some of the tourists to ask them to delete their videos. She explained that this had all been a misunderstanding and she did not want her mistake to be shared online. But most people ignored her requests or simply walked away. Palace security guards finally arrived at Sarah's location to assess the situation. Sarah felt relieved thinking that they would take her side and help her file a complaint about how the royal guards had treated her. She started explaining to the security team that the guards had been unnecessarily rough with an innocent tourist. But the security guards had a very different perspective on what had happened. They told Sarah that she had violated several palace rules by crossing the barriers and interfering with an official ceremony. They explained that the royal guards had actually shown remarkable restraint and professionalism in how they dealt with her disruption. The head security guard told Sarah that she was lucky the guards had been so gentle with her. He explained that in other countries, tourists who interfered with military ceremonies faced serious legal consequences, including arrest and deportation. Sarah was shocked to learn that her actions could have resulted in criminal charges. Sarah tried to argue that she was just taking photos like any other tourist, but the security guards were not convinced. They had witnessed her repeated refusal to follow directions and her deliberate decision to cross into the ceremonial area. They told her that ignorance of the rules was not an excuse for disrespectful behavior. The ceremony was now over, and the crowds began to disperse. As people walked away, Sarah could hear them continuing to discuss what they had witnessed. Some tourists approached her to ask if she was okay, but their concern was mixed with obvious disapproval of her actions. A family from Japan politely suggested that Sarah should consider apologizing for disrupting the ceremony. They explained that in their culture, showing respect for traditions and following rules was very important. Sarah dismissed their advice, saying that American tourists should not have to follow the same rules as everyone else. Sarah spent the next hour trying to salvage her photo session, but everything had gone wrong. Her hair was messy from the encounter with the guard. Her expensive clothes were wrinkled and dirty. Worst of all, she kept noticing tourists pointing at her and whispering about what had happened. As Sarah finally left Buckingham Palace, she had no idea that videos of her encounter were already spreading across social media platforms around the world. Her 15 minutes of fame were just beginning, and the consequences of her entitled behavior were about to follow her everywhere she went. By the time Sarah returned to her hotel that afternoon, the videos of her encounter with the royal guards had already been uploaded to multiple social media platforms. The teenagers who had recorded everything were experienced at creating viral content, and they knew exactly how to make their videos spread quickly across the internet. The first video appeared on a popular social media app with the caption entitled "American Tourist Learns Royal Guards Do Not Play Around." Within 2 hours, the video had been viewed 50,000 times. By evening, it had reached over 500,000 views and was being shared by accounts all over the world. Sarah had no idea about any of this until she tried to video call her sister back in Ohio. Her sister answered the phone with a shocked expression and immediately asked Sarah if she was the woman in the viral video from Buckingham Palace. Sarah felt her heart sink as she realized that her embarrassing moment had somehow reached her hometown. Her sister explained that multiple friends had sent her links to videos showing Sarah disrupting the royal guard ceremony. The videos were being shared with captions like "Heron meets her match at Buckingham Palace" and "Tourist gets reality check from British soldiers." Sarah's sister said the videos had already been viewed millions of times. Sarah spent the rest of the evening trying to understand how her private vacation moment had become international news. She discovered that her encounter had been posted on dozens of different social media platforms. Each platform had thousands of comments from people around the world reacting to her behavior. Most of the comments were extremely critical of Sarah's actions. People from the United Kingdom expressed anger that an American tourist had shown such disrespect for their traditions. Military veterans from various countries praised the royal guards for their professionalism and discipline. Many comments criticized entitled tourist behavior in general. Some comments were more personal and hurtful. People made fun of Sarah's appearance and clothing choices. Others created memes using screenshots from the videos. A few comments even tried to identify Sarah by name and location, though most of this information was incorrect. Sarah tried to create her own social media accounts to defend herself and tell her side of the story. She posted explanations saying that she had simply made an innocent mistake and the situation had been blown out of proportion. She argued that the royal guards should have been more understanding of confused tourists. But Sarah's attempts to control the narrative only made things worse. Her defensive posts were screenshot and shared as examples of how entitled tourists refused to take responsibility for their actions. People responded to her explanations with even more criticism and ridicule. The story was picked up by online news websites that specialized in viral content and tourist behavior stories. Articles appeared with headlines like "American Tourist Disrupts Historic Royal Ceremony" and entitled "Vacation Behavior Goes Viral." The articles included the videos and detailed descriptions of what had happened. Travel bloggers began using Sarah's story as an example of how not to behave when visiting foreign countries. Tourism websites added her incident to lists of embarrassing tourist moments that had gone viral. Cultural sensitivity training programs started using the videos as examples of disrespectful behavior. Sarah discovered that the videos had spread far beyond social media into mainstream news coverage. Television shows in multiple countries featured her story as an example of problematic tourist behavior. Radio programs discussed the incident as part of conversations about cultural respect and travel etiquette. The international attention brought even more scrutiny to Sarah's behavior during the rest of her London vacation. Other tourists at popular attractions began recognizing her from the viral videos. Some people approached her to ask if she was the woman from Buckingham Palace. Others simply pointed and whispered when they saw her. Sarah tried to continue her planned tourist activities, but everywhere she went, people seemed to recognize her. At the Tower of London, several tourists asked to take photos with her, treating her like an infamous celebrity. At Westminster Abbey, she overheard a tour guide telling his group about the American tourist who had recently disrupted the royal guards. By the time Sarah returned to her hotel that afternoon, the videos of her encounter with the royal guards had already been uploaded to multiple social media platforms. The teenagers who had recorded everything were experienced at creating viral content, and they knew exactly how to make their videos spread quickly across the internet. The first video appeared on a popular social media app with the caption entitled "American Tourist Learns Royal Guards Do Not Play Around." Within 2 hours, the video had been viewed 50,000 times. By evening, it had reached over 500,000 views and was being shared by accounts all over the world. Sarah had no idea about any of this until she tried to video call her sister back in Ohio. Her sister answered the phone with a shocked expression and immediately asked Sarah if she was the woman in the viral video from Buckingham Palace. Sarah felt her heart sink as she realized that her embarrassing moment had somehow reached her hometown. Her sister explained that multiple friends had sent her links to videos showing Sarah disrupting the Royal Guard ceremony. The videos were being shared with captions like "Karen meets her match at Buckingham Palace" and "Tourist gets reality check from British soldiers." Sarah's sister said the videos had already been viewed millions of times. Sarah spent the rest of the evening trying to understand how her private vacation moment had become international news. She discovered that her encounter had been posted on dozens of different social media platforms. Each platform had thousands of comments from people around the world reacting to her behavior. Most of the comments were extremely critical of Sarah's actions. People from the United Kingdom expressed anger that an American tourist had shown such disrespect for their traditions. Military veterans from various countries praised the royal guards for their professionalism and discipline. Many comments criticized entitled tourist behavior in general. Some comments were more personal and hurtful. People made fun of Sarah's appearance and clothing choices. Others created memes using screenshots from the videos. A few comments even tried to identify Sarah by name and location, though most of this information was incorrect. Sarah tried to create her own social media accounts to defend herself and tell her side of the story. She posted explanations saying that she had simply made an innocent mistake and the situation had been blown out of proportion. She argued that the royal guards should have been more understanding of confused tourists. But Sarah's attempts to control the narrative only made things worse. Her defensive posts were screenshot and shared as examples of how entitled tourists refuse to take responsibility for their actions. People responded to her explanations with even more criticism and ridicule. The story was picked up by online news websites that specialized in viral content and tourist behavior stories. Articles appeared with headlines like "American Tourist Disrupts Historic Royal Ceremony" and "Entitled Vacation Behavior Goes Viral." The articles included the videos and detailed descriptions of what had happened. Travel bloggers began using Sarah's story as an example of how not to behave when visiting foreign countries. Tourism websites added her incident to lists of embarrassing tourist moments that had gone viral. Cultural sensitivity training programs started using the videos as examples of disrespectful behavior. Sarah discovered that the videos had spread far beyond social media into mainstream news coverage. Television shows in multiple countries featured her story as an example of problematic tourist behavior. Radio programs discussed the incident as part of conversations about cultural respect and travel etiquette. The international attention brought even more scrutiny to Sarah's behavior during the rest of her London vacation. Other tourists at popular attractions began recognizing her from the viral videos. Some people approached her to ask if she was the woman from Buckingham Palace. Others simply pointed and whispered when they saw her. Sarah tried to continue her planned tourist activities, but everywhere she went, people seemed to recognize her. At the Tower of London, several tourists asked to take photos with her, treating her like an infamous celebrity. At Westminster Abbey, she overheard a tour guide telling his group about the American tourist who had recently disrupted the royal guards. The viral fame followed Sarah to restaurants, hotels, and shops throughout London. Staff members who had seen the videos sometimes gave her strange looks or provided less friendly service. Sarah began to understand that her actions had consequences that extended far beyond the few minutes at Buckingham Palace. By the end of her week in London, Sarah had experienced what it felt like to be internationally famous for all the wrong reasons. She realized that her entitled behavior had not only ruined her own vacation, but had also created a permanent record of her poor choices that would follow her long after she returned home to Ohio. Sarah's flight back to Ohio was one of the most uncomfortable experiences of her entire life. During the long journey home, she had plenty of time to think about everything that had happened during her London vacation. She could not escape the reality that her behavior had been recorded and shared with millions of people around the world. When Sarah landed at the airport in Ohio, she hoped that maybe the viral videos had not reached her small hometown. But as she walked through the terminal, she noticed several people looking at her with recognition in their eyes. A few travelers even took out their phones to record her walking past them. Sarah took a taxi home from the airport and spent the ride checking social media to see if the situation had gotten any better. Instead, she discovered that the videos were still spreading and new articles about her incident were being published every day. Travel websites were using her story as a case study in tourist behavior gone wrong. The next morning, Sarah had to return to work at the insurance office where she had been employed for over 10 years. She hoped that her coworkers might not have seen the videos, since they were all busy with their own lives and responsibilities. But as soon as she walked into the office, she could tell that everyone knew exactly what had happened in London. Her boss called Sarah into his office for a private conversation. He explained that several clients had contacted the company after recognizing Sarah from the viral videos. Some clients were concerned about being associated with an employee who had gained international attention for disrespectful behavior. The boss said this was creating problems for the company reputation. Sarah's coworkers treated her differently than they had before her vacation. Some people avoided talking to her altogether, while others made jokes about royal guards and tourist behavior. During lunch breaks, Sarah could hear people whispering about her experience and sharing the videos with employees who had not seen them yet. The social media attention also affected Sarah's personal relationships. Friends and family members had different reactions to her viral fame. Some people were embarrassed to be associated with her behavior, while others defended her, saying that everyone makes mistakes when traveling. But even the supportive comments made Sarah realize how badly she had handled the situation. Sarah's mother called her several times to discuss what had happened. Her mother had received phone calls from relatives and neighbors who had seen the videos online. Sarah's mother was disappointed that her daughter had behaved so poorly during such an expensive vacation. She suggested that Sarah should consider apologizing publicly for her actions. For the first time in her adult life, Sarah began to seriously examine her own behavior and attitude toward other people. She started to understand that her sense of entitlement had been affecting her relationships and interactions for years. The royal guards had simply been the first people she had encountered who could not be bullied or intimidated by her demands. Sarah realized that she had been treating service workers, restaurant staff, and retail employees poorly for a long time. She had always justified this behavior by telling herself that she was a paying customer who deserved special treatment. But watching the videos of her own behavior made her see how unreasonable and rude she had been. The experience forced Sarah to confront some uncomfortable truths about herself. She had spent years believing that spending money gave her the right to treat other people badly. She had never considered how her entitled attitude affected the people around her or made their jobs more difficult and stressful. Sarah began making changes in her daily behavior, starting with how she treated people in service industries. She started saying please and thank you more often. She stopped making unreasonable demands when things did not go exactly as planned. She began treating restaurant servers, retail workers, and customer service representatives with basic respect and kindness. The changes in Sarah's behavior were noticed by the people around her. Her coworkers commented that she seemed more considerate and less demanding than before her vacation. Store employees and restaurant staff began providing her with better service because she was treating them like human beings instead of personal servants. Sarah also started volunteering at a local charity that helped low-income families with basic needs. Working with people who had real problems put her own complaints and demands into perspective. She realized that most of her previous frustrations had been about minor inconveniences that she had blown out of proportion. 6 months after her London vacation, Sarah had become a completely different person. The viral videos were still online, and occasionally someone would recognize her from the incident. But instead of feeling embarrassed, Sarah now used these moments as opportunities to discuss what she had learned about respect and personal responsibility. Sarah never got the perfect vacation photos she had dreamed about, but she received something much more valuable. The royal guards had given her a life-changing lesson about humility, respect, and the importance of treating all people with dignity, regardless of their job or position in life.